Most people think impossible decisions are hard because they don't know the right answer. Stoics knew the truth is far more uncomfortable. Impossible decisions are hard because every option costs you something you care about. A relationship, a version of yourself, a future you imagined, the approval of others, or the comfort of staying familiar. When people say they're stuck, what they really mean is that they're afraid of the emotional price. Stoics didn't wait for certainty or perfect clarity. They understood that clarity often comes after the decision, not before it. And the moment you accept that, something powerful happens. You stop trying to avoid regret and start choosing in a way that makes regret powerless. Stoics approached impossible decisions by separating what feels painful from what actually matters. Most people decide based on fear of loss, losing comfort, status, love, money, or identity. Stoics flipped this entirely. They asked a brutal but freeing question. What part of this is actually under my control? Not the outcome, not how others react, not whether the decision hurts, only the intention, the effort, and the character behind the choice. When you decide based on those three things, regret loses its grip, because regret feeds on outcomes you were never meant to control in the first place. One of the biggest reasons people feel regret is because they try to choose the option that keeps the most doors open. Stoics knew this was a trap. Keeping all doors open feels safe, but it slowly rots your life from the inside. Every delayed decision is still a decision, just one made by fear and time instead of by you. Stoics believed that closing a door with integrity is far healthier than standing frozen in a hallway of maybes. Once a decision is made deliberately and honestly, they treated it as final. No mental rewinding, no what-if spirals, no emotional self-punishment. The past, to them, was no longer a negotiation. Stoics also understood something modern culture avoids. Pain does not automatically mean a decision was wrong. Sometimes pain is simply the price of alignment. When you choose based on values instead of comfort, there will almost always be discomfort at first. Stoics trained themselves to expect that discomfort, so it didn't scare them. This is why their decisions looked calm from the outside while everyone else was panicking. They weren't numb, they were prepared. They knew that avoiding short-term pain often creates lifelong regret, while accepting short-term pain often prevents it. Another reason Stoics made impossible decisions without regret is that they refused to confuse guilt with responsibility. Guilt comes from trying to control how others feel. Responsibility comes from acting honestly and fairly. Stoics focused on responsibility alone. They didn't carry emotional debt for choices that were necessary but unpopular. If they acted with fairness, reason, and sincerity, they released themselves from the burden of pleasing everyone. Regret thrives when you believe you owed others a different version of yourself. Stoics knew you only owe the world your best judgment, not a sacrifice of your truth. Stoics also trained their minds to look forward instead of backward. Regret is a backward-looking emotion. It asks, what should I have done? Stoicism asks a better question. What does this moment require of me now? Even if a decision led to loss, they didn't sit in self-blame. They treated mistakes as data, not identity. A bad outcome didn't mean they were a bad person. It meant reality gave feedback. This mindset made regret unnecessary because learning replaced punishment. One of the most powerful Stoic ideas is that no decision can ruin you unless it corrupts your character. You can lose money, relationships, opportunities, or time, and still be intact. But when you betray your values to avoid discomfort, that's when regret becomes unbearable. Stoics anchored their decisions in who they wanted to be, not what they wanted to keep. This is why they could walk away from things others clung to desperately. They understood that integrity is the one possession that doesn't recover once traded away. Stoics also rejected emotional urgency. Impossible decisions feel urgent because emotions demand immediate relief. Stoics slowed everything down. They believed urgency is often fear wearing a mask. By giving themselves space, even briefly, they stopped emotions from hijacking their judgment. They didn't ask, "What will make me feel better today?" They asked, "What decision will I respect myself for later?" That single shift neutralizes regret before it even has a chance to form. Finally, Stoics didn't romanticize certainty. They accepted uncertainty as the natural condition of being human. Waiting to feel ready was never part of their process. They acted when reason said it was time, even if fear was still present. They understood that courage is not the absence of fear, it's movement in spite of it. And once they moved forward, they committed fully. No second guessing, no mental punishment, no reopening closed chapters. That commitment is what made regret irrelevant. Think about someone who stays in a relationship long after it has stopped being honest. On the surface, the decision to leave feels impossible because it hurts someone else and destroys something familiar. But Stoics would see the real danger differently. Staying out of fear slowly teaches you to betray your own judgment every day. One man stays because he doesn't want to be the bad guy. Years later, regret doesn't come from leaving too late. It comes from realizing he abandoned himself long before the relationship ended. A Stoic would make the painful decision early, not because it feels good, but because delaying only compounds dishonesty. When the choice is made with clarity and respect, regret has nothing to feed on later. Consider a career decision where security fights purpose. Someone works a stable job they secretly hate, telling themselves it's responsible. Years pass, promotions come, the pay improves, but the inner tension grows louder. Stoics warned against this exact trap. They believed misery disguised as safety is one of the most dangerous illusions. Leaving the job feels impossible because it threatens identity and comfort. Yet regret doesn't come from trying and failing. It comes from never trying at all. Stoics accepted that loss of income, status, or certainty was survivable. What wasn't survivable was waking up decades later knowing you chose fear over alignment every single day. Even in family decisions, Stoics were brutally honest with themselves. Imagine setting boundaries with a parent or relative who constantly oversteps. Most people avoid the confrontation to keep peace, but peace built on self-erasure eventually turns into resentment. Stoics understood that resentment is delayed regret. When you speak calmly and firmly, knowing the other person may react poorly, you are not being cruel, you are being clear. Stoics judged their decision by how fairly they acted, not by whether everyone approved. If the conversation was honest and respectful, they considered their duty fulfilled, regardless of emotional fallout. Stoics also faced decisions involving loyalty and truth. Think of someone who knows a friend is making destructive choices, substance abuse, harmful relationships, reckless behavior. Saying nothing feels easier. Speaking up risks losing the friendship. Stoics believed silence can be a form of cowardice when truth is required. They didn't force outcomes, but they did refuse to protect illusions. If the friendship ended because honesty was unwelcome, they accepted the loss without regret. Their peace came from knowing they acted according to reason, not comfort. Another real-life example appears when someone must choose between staying in a familiar environment and stepping into loneliness for growth. Leaving a hometown, a friend group, or a lifestyle often feels like betrayal. Stoics didn't confuse loyalty with stagnation. They believed growth naturally creates distance, and trying to prevent that distance leads to quiet self-contempt. A Stoic would rather endure loneliness with self-respect than companionship built on pretending. Regret in their eyes wasn't loneliness, it was staying small to avoid it. Stoics also handled irreversible decisions with remarkable calm. Losing someone, missing an opportunity, or making a choice that closes a door forever didn't destroy them. They practiced accepting reality as it is, not as it should have been. For example, someone who turns down an opportunity out of fear may later feel regret. But Stoics wouldn't dwell on the missed chance. They would ask, what virtue does this moment demand now? Action replaced rumination. Movement replaced mourning. Regret cannot survive in a mind focused on present responsibility. They also understood that regret often comes from storytelling, not facts. After a decision, people rewrite history. If only I had done this, everything would be perfect. Stoics rejected these fantasies. They reminded themselves that every option contained unknown suffering. The life you didn't choose had its own pain. You just don't get to see it. This mental discipline protected them from idealizing alternate timelines and punishing themselves for imaginary outcomes. Even when Stoics made objectively wrong decisions, they didn't collapse under shame. A business fails, a judgment call backfires, a trust is misplaced. Instead of spiraling into self-attack, they separated error from identity. They believed regret becomes toxic only when you turn a mistake into a verdict about who you are. For them, failure was simply instruction delivered harshly. Learn, adjust, move forward. No emotional drama required. What truly made Stoics fearless decision-makers was their relationship with loss. They rehearsed loss mentally long before it arrived. Losing comfort, reputation, money, or approval wasn't a shock. It was expected. When you stop treating loss as an emergency, decisions become cleaner. You stop bargaining with fear. You stop delaying the inevitable. You choose with clarity because you're no longer trying to protect illusions. Stoics didn't eliminate emotion. They mastered perspective. They allowed sadness, discomfort, and grief to exist without letting those feelings rewrite their values. That's why their decisions appeared unshakable. Not because they didn't care, but because they cared about the right things. When values lead, regret simply doesn't have a role to play. There is a level of decision-making Stoics reached that most people never touch, and it begins when you stop asking whether a decision will make you happy. Happiness is unstable. It reacts to mood, comfort, approval, and outcomes. Stoics asked something colder and far more reliable. Is this decision aligned with reality? For example, someone stays in a marriage hoping love will return if they just try harder. A Stoic would observe the facts without fantasy. Is respect still present? Is effort mutual? Is truth still allowed in this space? When the answers turn consistently negative, hope becomes denial. Leaving hurts, but staying while lying to yourself hurts longer. Regret doesn't come from choosing reality. It comes from resisting it. Stoics also recognized that impossible decisions often feel impossible because they threaten an identity you've outgrown. A woman leaves a career everyone praises her for. A man walks away from a lifestyle that looks successful on the outside. The fear isn't failure, it's losing the version of yourself others recognize. Stoics understood identity as temporary. They believed clinging to an outdated identity was like wearing clothes that no longer fit, just to avoid explaining yourself. When they let an identity die, they didn't mourn it endlessly. They treated it as a necessary shedding, not a personal collapse. Another layer Stoics mastered was the idea that regret is often social, not personal. Many people don't regret their decisions in private. They regret how others judged those decisions. A Stoic stripped this illusion away. If a choice was reasonable, honest, and fair, they did not relive it just because it offended someone else's expectations. This is why Stoics could be misunderstood without becoming bitter. They accepted that being respected by everyone is incompatible with living truthfully. In real life, this shows up when someone chooses solitude over chaos, cutting off draining friendships, stepping back from social circles, or choosing silence over constant engagement feels lonely at first. Society tells you loneliness is failure. Stoics saw it as neutral, sometimes even necessary. They believed peace earned through solitude was healthier than connection maintained through self-abandonment. Regret doesn't grow in silence. It grows in noise, distraction, and constant comparison. Stoics also understood timing in a way most people ignore. Many people don't regret the decision itself. They regret how long they waited to make it. Staying too long, enduring too much, explaining yourself endlessly, hoping circumstances will magically change. Stoics believed delay corrodes clarity. When reason repeatedly presents the same answer, ignoring it becomes a form of self-betrayal. And that betrayal is where regret eventually lives. They also trained themselves not to seek emotional closure from others. A Stoic didn't need apologies, understanding, or validation to move forward. If a decision was sound, they closed the chapter internally. This freed them from reopening wounds through conversations that never deliver peace anyway. Waiting for someone else to agree with your decision is another way regret sneaks back in. One of the hardest Stoic practices was accepting that some decisions will hurt people no matter how gently they're made. Stoics didn't soften truth into lies to protect feelings. They believed compassion without honesty becomes manipulation. When a choice causes pain but is rooted in truth, Stoics allowed that pain to exist without trying to erase it. They didn't carry shame for choosing what was necessary over what was comfortable. And here's where Stoic decision-making becomes almost uncomfortable to modern minds. They did not relitigate decisions emotionally once made. They refused to emotionally visit old paths. No mental replaying, no imaginary alternate lives, no self-punishment disguised as reflection. Once a decision passed through reason and values, it was sealed. Revisiting it served no purpose except emotional self-harm. This is where regret dies completely. Regret cannot survive in a mind that refuses to live in imaginary timelines. It feeds on fantasy, not facts. Stoics stayed grounded in the present obligation. Whatever came next, loss, rebuilding, discomfort, they met it directly. Action replaced rumination. And if this way of thinking is hitting something deep in you right now, if you're realizing that the decision you've been avoiding already has an answer, you don't need motivation. You need clarity and courage. If this resonates with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to PSYCHOVEST, and share it with someone who's stuck at a crossroads. Sometimes one idea at the right moment can stop years of regret before it ever begins. Stoics didn't rely on motivation or inspiration to make hard decisions. They built daily rituals that stripped emotion out of the process before emotion had a chance to distort reality. One of their most brutal habits was beginning the day by assuming difficulty was guaranteed, not hoping things would go smoothly, not manifesting ease, but calmly accepting that frustration, disappointment, and resistance were coming. When you stop being surprised by difficulty, you stop taking it personally. And when you stop taking things personally, decisions become cleaner. Most regret comes from emotional shock, not from the decision itself. Each morning, Stoics ask themselves a question most people avoid. What am I likely to do today that I will later justify instead of respect? This question exposes self-deception early. You already know when you're about to choose comfort over integrity. You feel it in the hesitation, the bargaining, the need to explain. Stoics didn't wait for regret to reveal bad decisions. They identified them in advance by noticing where they felt the urge to rationalize. Another daily ritual was rehearsing loss before it happened. Stoics would mentally walk through losing things they valued: relationships, health, status, money. Not to be pessimistic, but to weaken attachment. When you practice losing something in your mind, it stops owning you. This is where the harsh truth lives. The thing you're afraid to lose already controls your decisions. Until you accept that, you are not choosing. You are being managed by fear. Stoics preferred the pain of acceptance over the humiliation of quiet slavery. They also had a ruthless way of testing decisions. Would I still choose this if no one ever knew? No praise, no recognition, no sympathy, no validation, just you and the outcome. Most people's decisions collapse under this question because they're performing for an audience. parents, partners, friends, society, even imagined critics. Stoics believed decisions made for applause always rot into regret, because applause never stays. At the end of each day, Stoics practiced honest self-audits, not affirmations, not self-love speeches. They asked, "Where did I betray my own judgment today?" Not to shame themselves, but to remove illusion. They believed ignoring self-betrayal was far more damaging than confronting it. This is uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Regret doesn't come from being too hard on yourself. It comes from being dishonest with yourself for too long. Stoics also trained themselves to act before emotions settled. Waiting to feel ready was seen as a form of procrastination, disguised as wisdom. They understood that emotions lag behind reason. If you wait for fear to disappear before acting, you will wait forever. Courage to them was not a personality trait. It was a daily practice of moving while uncomfortable. Regret fades when you respect your own follow-through. Another harsh Stoic truth is this: clarity is not kind. Clear decisions often feel cold, lonely, and unpopular at first. If a decision feels universally approved, it's probably shallow. Stoics did not confuse discomfort with error. They believed that if a decision aligned with truth and values, emotional pain was not a warning sign, it was a side effect. Most people turn back right here. Stoics kept walking. Stoics also rejected endless emotional processing. They believed reflection had a purpose, and once that purpose was fulfilled, continued rumination was self-indulgent. If reflection no longer leads to action, it becomes a prison. Regret thrives in overthinking because it feels productive while doing nothing. Stoics respected action more than emotional analysis. Once the lesson was learned, the mind moved on. A daily Stoic ritual many people would find unsettling was imagining their life being observed by someone they deeply respected, not to impress them, but to measure honesty. Not asking, would they approve, but would they see through me? This practice dismantled excuses quickly. You cannot hide from a mind that values truth over comfort. Stoics also accepted a truth modern culture avoids. Some decisions permanently narrow your life. You don't get every path. You don't get every version of yourself. Every deep choice is a sacrifice. Stoics didn't resent this. They respected it. They believed a life with no sacrifices is a life with no direction. Regret grows in people who demand infinite options in a finite existence. Finally, Stoics practiced ending days the same way they ended decisions, cleanly. No emotional dragging, no reopening conversations in the mind, no reliving tone, timing, or wording. What was done was done. If repair was needed, they planned it. If not, they released it. This discipline alone eliminated most regret, because regret needs mental replay to survive. Stoics starved it. Stoics understood that some decisions don't just change circumstances, they erase identities. And this is where most people collapse. When a relationship ends, a career dies, health fails, or a role disappears, people don't just grieve what they lost. They grieve who they were allowed to be inside that structure. A parent without daily purpose, a partner without reflection, a professional without status. Stoics didn't romanticize this moment. They called it what it was, death. Not metaphorical death, psychological death. And they believed resisting it creates more suffering than the loss itself. Under extreme loss, Stoics did something most people find terrifying. They stopped asking, "Why me?" entirely. That question assumes reality owes fairness. Stoics rejected that assumption. They believed life does not negotiate, explain itself, or pause for grief. This wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. Once you stop demanding reasons, energy returns. And with energy comes the ability to choose again. Regret often hides inside the belief that life should have gone differently. Stoics removed that belief completely. When identity collapses, most people rush to replace it. New relationships, distractions, labels, or achievements. Stoics did the opposite. They allowed the void. They believed rushing into a new identity before mourning the old one creates fragile selves that break easily. This is a hard truth. If you don't let an identity die fully, it will haunt your decisions later. You will keep choosing to protect a version of yourself that no longer exists. Regret grows strongest in people who refuse to update their self-image. Decision-making under extreme loss required Stoics to reduce life to its smallest unit, the next correct action. Not the future, not meaning, not happiness, just the next step done with integrity. After exile, imprisonment, financial ruin, or personal betrayal, Stoics did not ask how to rebuild everything. They asked, what is within my power right now? This prevented overwhelm and protected dignity. Regret feeds on the belief that you should have fixed everything faster. One of the harshest Stoic truths is that loss reveals how much of your identity was borrowed from roles, titles, people, or approval. When those disappear, panic sets in because nothing internal was built. Stoics saw this clearly and without judgment. They believed identity must be internal to survive chaos. Values, discipline, reason, character. These cannot be taken. Everything else is temporary, whether you like it or not. Stoics also made decisions under grief without trusting grief. They allowed sadness, but did not let it vote. This is critical. Under extreme loss, emotions scream for relief, revenge, retreat, or numbness. Stoics delayed action until emotions softened enough for reason to speak. Not days, sometimes moments, but they never handed authority to pain. Regret often comes from decisions made to escape pain, not from decisions made in its presence. Another brutal Stoic practice was accepting that some losses permanently downgrade your life. Not everything gets better. Some doors never reopen. Some damage never reverses. Stoics did not pretend otherwise. And yet they still believed dignity was possible. Meaning was still possible. Peace was still possible. This acceptance prevented false hope from poisoning future choices. Regret thrives on imagined recoveries that never come. In moments of extreme loss, Stoics measured decisions by one question only. Does this preserve my character? Not comfort, not reputation, not emotional relief. Character. You can scream, you can grieve, you can fall apart privately. But decisions made publicly still mattered. This is why Stoics could lose everything and still command respect, because they never abandoned themselves. They also understood that identity death feels like emptiness because it is supposed to. You are not meant to feel whole during transformation. Wholeness is the reward after rebuilding, not during demolition. Stoics allowed themselves to feel hollow without trying to fill the space immediately. Most people panic here and make desperate choices just to feel solid again. Those choices later become regret. Stoics believed extreme loss was not a test of positivity, but a test of restraint. Can you refrain from becoming bitter, from collapsing into victimhood, from using pain as justification to harm yourself or others? These moments reveal who you are when nothing protects you. Decisions made here echo louder than those made in comfort. Finally, Stoics understood that identity death is irreversible. You do not return to who you were. You shouldn't try. The person who survives loss is not meant to be softer or stronger in obvious ways, but truer. Regret fades when you stop wishing to resurrect old selves and start respecting the one that endured. Stoics believed the highest form of freedom came when a person stopped organizing their life around how it would be remembered emotionally and started organizing it around how it would stand morally. Most people want to be remembered as loved, admired, successful, or misunderstood geniuses. Stoics aimed for something colder and far rarer, to have lived in a way that required no explanation. A life that makes sense, even when stripped of context, even when misunderstood, even when history edits out your intentions. Regret disappears when you stop trying to curate a narrative and start living in alignment with principles that don't depend on applause. At the legacy level, Stoics no longer asked whether decisions felt meaningful. Meaning is emotional and unstable. They asked whether their choices strengthened or weakened the kind of person who could endure reality without corruption. This reframes everything. A painful decision isn't evaluated by how much it hurts, but by whether it preserves clarity, restraint, courage, and fairness. When life is seen this way, even suffering becomes organized. It no longer feels random. It becomes weight you carry with posture instead of collapse. Stoics understood that most people waste their lives trying to be understood by the wrong audience. Family who cannot see you clearly, partners who love versions of you that no longer exist, societies that reward surface compliance over depth. Stoics let go of the fantasy that clarity would ever be universally rewarded. They accepted isolation as a side effect of truth. This acceptance is what turns solitude from punishment into sanctuary. Regret thrives in people who keep trying to negotiate their authenticity. At the deepest level, Stoics did not measure life by outcomes, milestones, or happiness, but by coherence. Did your actions match your values when no one was watching? Did your words align with your behavior when it cost you something? Did you act with restraint when emotion demanded reaction? Coherence creates inner silence, and inner silence is where regret cannot speak. Legacy-level Stoics also stopped measuring life linearly. They did not see life as a climb towards success or decline into failure. They saw it as a series of tests of character, repeating in different forms. Lose money, lose love, lose health, lose status. Each time, the same question returns. Will you abandon your principles to escape discomfort, or will you carry them forward intact? Once you see this pattern, life becomes less personal and more precise. They also believed that the ultimate legacy is not what you build, but what you refuse to become. Not becoming cruel when hurt, not becoming bitter when overlooked, not becoming dishonest when desperate, not becoming small when afraid. This restraint shapes a life more powerfully than any achievement. Most regret is not about what people failed to do, but about who they allowed themselves to become under pressure. Stoics knew that time eventually erases nearly everything. Names, achievements, reputations, even empires. So they invested in the only thing time cannot undo: the way a person meets reality moment by moment. When you live this way, death loses its drama. It becomes a closing bracket, not a judgment. A life lived with integrity does not require emotional justification at the end. At the very end of Stoic wisdom is a truth few people are willing to face. Your life will not feel complete. It is not supposed to. Completion is a fantasy the ego clings to. Stoics aimed for sufficiency, not fulfillment. They believed it was enough to have acted rightly more often than not, enough to have corrected themselves when they failed, enough to have remained awake instead of numb. When you adopt this frame, regret collapses entirely. There is no perfect life to compare yours against. There is only the question of whether you met each moment with honesty and restraint. And when that becomes the measure, even a difficult life becomes a dignified one. And this is the quiet power of Stoic legacy. Not a life remembered loudly, but one that does not echo with unresolved self-betrayal when everything else goes silent. In the end, Stoics did not try to build lives that were impressive. They tried to build lives that were internally settled. They understood that the world will misunderstand you, people will misjudge you, opportunities will slip past you, and losses will come without warning. None of that determines whether your life was well lived. What determines it is far simpler and far more demanding. Did you act in alignment with what you knew to be right when it was hardest to do so? Impossible decisions were never about finding the perfect outcome. They were about refusing to fracture under pressure. Stoics did not avoid regret by predicting the future correctly. They avoided regret by refusing to betray their judgment in the present. That is the difference. Most people want certainty before they act. Stoics acted once clarity appeared, even if fear remained. When identity died, they let it die. When loss came, they met it without negotiation. When doors closed, they did not sit outside them replaying alternate realities. They moved forward, even if forward felt smaller than before. They understood that a life built on integrity may look ordinary from the outside, but it feels unshakable from within. At the end of everything, titles gone, relationships changed, bodies aged, reputations faded, the only thing that remains is whether you lived in quiet alignment with your principles. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but honestly. That is what silences regret. Because regret is not the memory of pain. It is the memory of self-betrayal. And when you stop betraying yourself, even the hardest decisions become clean. That is how Stoics faced impossible choices, and that is how a life becomes steady, even in loss.